Aloha, welcome to the G'day Sally Show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. Tonight I'm going to read a story from my book, Footsteps to Fairy Forest. And you remember it was about a little girl who found a map, and the map was covered with all kinds of footsteps on the way to Fairy Forest. And so she sets out, and she's already found footstep number 1, footstep 2, footstep 3, footstep 4, and footstep 5. And whenever she finds a footstep, she meets a new fairy. So tonight I'm going to read you the story about footstep 6 and the next fairy. So you'll have to wait to find out what the fairy is tonight. Footstep 6. My dreams were full of fairies last night, and I could hardly wait until morning so I could go and find another footstep and another fairy. I woke up extra early and studied my map in the soft dawn light of my bedroom. Footstep 6 was marked on my map in the direction of east-southeast, and as I examined the map, I could see what looked like a tiny golden flower marking where footstep 6 was. It was so small that I knew I would have to look very closely on the path to find it. I thought I should take my torch with me in case I needed to shine a light along the path to see it, and I put that in my bucket. I was so anxious to find footstep 6 that I walked extra fast, and even though I had to find my way around bushes and past some small fallen logs, I kept checking the ground to make sure I wouldn't miss the golden flower. Every now and then I would stop and get out my compass to check that I was going in the right direction. Suddenly I came across a big wooden fence blocking my path. I was sure that I would be able to climb it. So I passed my bucket through the wooden slats and then I climbed up and over it. The fence was covered in creepers, and the creepers were covered in flowers. As I started walking again, I was surrounded by the most beautiful flowers I had ever seen. They were all the colours of a rainbow. In fact, they even looked like a huge rainbow all over the ground. I felt sure that this must mean that I was close to the spot where I would see the golden flower. And sure enough, just as I passed the last of the flowers, I looked down at my feet and there it was. It wasn't shining because there was some dirt covering part of it, so it was hard to see. But after I brushed off the dirt, I could see it clearly, a tiny golden flower. I picked it up and put it in my bucket, and then I used my spade to dig down and find the pebble which said, Footstep 6. Suddenly I could feel a breeze on my face and something caught my eye. I saw a bright blue and green flash just near me. I couldn't believe my eyes as I sat down on a rock to see what the blue and green flash was. And you'll never believe it, but a green and blue fairy landed on my hand. She said her name was FELIDEA, and that she was the fairy of the flowers, and she was even carrying a flower. And then I fell asleep. So now that she's got to footstep 6, we're going to find out about FELIDEA, the fairy of the flowers. FELIDEA was puzzled. None of the flowers had woken up this morning. The sun was up, all the dew on the grass had disappeared, so by now all the flowers should be awake and open. She flew all over the forest, but the story was the same. All the flowers were still asleep. I will go and check the sunflowers, she thought. They are always the first flowers awake every morning. FELIDEA flew as fast as she could to see whether the sunflowers were awake. But when she reached the meadow where all the sunflowers grew, she could see that even the sunflowers were still asleep. What has happened, she thought. FELIDEA Fairy had never known a time when the flowers had forgotten to wake up in the morning. FELIDEA reached into her special secret fairy dust pocket for gold fairy dust. Gold fairy dust is the best fairy dust for waking up flowers. FELIDEA Fairy had never had to use any gold fairy dust before, because every morning the flowers would wake themselves up, and she had never known a single day when they had not been able to wake up. The fairy spent a very busy morning going from flower to flower, sprinkling them with gold fairy dust and saying her flower waking spell. Unicorn universe unusual, flowers forever feisty, waking willingly well, never nodding unnaturally. Once she had finished waking up all the flowers so that the bees and the ants and the hummingbirds could sip succulent nectar from each flower, Felidia set off to discover what had happened to keep all the flowers asleep this morning. She decided that she should search through all the darkest area of the forest and outside the forest, because only a dark spirit could have kept the flowers asleep. She tried to imagine who could have done such a dastardly deed as to keep all the beautiful flowers asleep with all their petals closed, so that the bees and the hummingbirds and the ants and the other insects who loved to sip their sweet nectar could not get inside the flower petals, and so they would all go hungry. As she reached the very darkest part of the forest, Felidia could hear a voice. It seemed to be singing, but it was a very deep, gruff voice, and she was shocked when she heard the words it was singing. No flowers, only weeds, growing in my weedy trees. No flowers, only weeds, so no pretty flower seeds. As she got closer, Felidia could see a dark figure singing and dancing around a dead tree trunk. The tree trunk was covered in dark green moss. No flowers, only weeds, growing in my weedy trees. No flowers, only weeds, so no pretty flower seeds. The fairy landed on the tree trunk so she could see who the dark figure was. Who are you? She asked. The dark figure stopped his dancing and singing for a minute. Who wants to know? I am Felidia, the fairy of the flowers, she said. Well, I am Weedy Willy Wizard, said the dark figure. Did you stop the flowers from opening this morning? Asked Felidia. Oh, you noticed that, did you? Said Weedy Willy Wizard. Clever, aren't I? Felidia was furious. No, you are not clever, you wicked wizard. Weedy Willy Wizard looked shocked. Why do you say that? Don't you know that the bees, the insects and the birds need the flowers to open every morning so that they can drink the nectar? So they will have to find nectar somewhere else, said Weedy Willy Wizard. Felidia Fairy stamped her foot. That will not do. There is nowhere else that they can get their nectar from. If the flowers don't open in the morning, the birds, the bees and the insects will die. Can't be helped, said Weedy Willy Wizard. I don't like flowers, so I put a spell on them to stop them opening. It worked, didn't it? Now Felidia was even madder. Just because you don't like flowers, you can't put a spell on them to stop them from opening. They must open. There are so many depending on the flowers. Well, I don't like them, said the wizard. Felidia thought about all the flowers all through the forest and even the ones outside the forest. What was she to do? How could she stop Weedy Willy Wizard from casting spells on them and stopping them from opening? Suddenly she had an idea. Would you like to be living where there are no flowers? She asked Weedy Willy Wizard. Would I? He said. That's what I've been telling you. Well, what if I showed you a place where you could live happily with no flowers? Would you stop casting spells on the flowers here? Weedy Willy Wizard thought about that for a minute and a second. Well, that would be wonderful, he said. So Felidia waved her magic fairy wand, which was made of tiny rainbow-coloured flowers, and cast her spell. Unicorn universe unusual, Weedy Willy Wizard wanting, isolated island instantly, no flowers flowering. Suddenly there was a loud cracking sound, and the dead tree trunk broke in two. Felidia fell backwards, and as she looked up, she could see Weedy Willy Wizard flying through the air with a very puzzled look on his face. Farewell, Willy, said Felidia. Come and visit me, Weedy Willy Wizard called back. One day, thought Felidia, but not today. Today I must check that all the flowers are ready to wake up tomorrow morning and every morning. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com. So I'll be back next week, so bye for now.